Hello everyone! Today we are talking about the Russian culture, the features which make up the core, distinguishing the Russian culture from all others on planet Earth. All these features have unique Russian names that cannot be translated into any of the existing languages without losing the meaning, although some dictionaries contain analogies of these words. Let's look into these fundamental concepts of the Russian culture. Some Russian words of a philosophical worldview nature require a detailed explanation. First, let's look into intuition and совесть. Intuition is something that involuntarily rises to the conscious level. It can rise in the following four ways: from subconsciousness, individual spirit, as a result of brainwashing by another person, by another individual spirit, from egregors of different kinds, collective spirits, as a result of obsessive-compulsive desire and possession. When this happens, a person cannot explain it on the basis of the cause-effect relationships, which this person understands. In other words, intuition is different inner voices. Among these inner voices, there is also the voice of the Creator. This voice is called совесть, which is an inborn sense of connection with the Creator and comes from man's subconsciousness. However, every inner voice is not always identified as совесть, the voice of совесть. Nevertheless, the Russian word совесть refers to a specific inner voice, the connection, the voice coming from the Creator. Meanwhile, the English word conscience often refers to any inner voice. In some situations, a native speaker may equate his conscience to the voice of God, but he cannot distinguish it from other inner voices, which he also names conscience. Let's see what else conscience refers to in the English-speaking countries. Conscience is a faculty of the mind that motivates us to act morally, or at least according to our most deeply held values. Most say it is a form of intuition and uses emotion, although others have argued that it should be shaped by reason. It is a private experience and a form of self-knowledge. From one's conscience, one can learn one's own values and morals. This is the root of the word, from the Latin conscientia, perhaps translatable as together with knowing, to be together with one's knowledge of morality. Yet conscience has been thought by many to be informed by an objective morality, with divine, transcendental or natural sources. Even in our society, where we ostensibly recognize the cultural and personal relativity of morality, conscience is granted a special status, with laws protecting the rights of doctors and others not to violate their consciences. So conscience is private, subjective, and culturally relative, but carries legal and political weight. There are many different ideas about conscience: religious, philosophical, scientific, legal, and popular. Religious. In most religions, the morality that informs conscience does or should come from either God or an enlightened mind. Religions differ as to whether conscience is thought of mainly as a punisher or as a virtue to be cultivated. Philosophical. Many philosophers have written that a truly moral conscience requires the exercise of reason. Others have claimed that it is an intuition of objective moral truth. Pre-modern philosophers tended to believe in a natural and objective morality, informing conscience, something like a truly moral instinct. Modern philosophers tend to recognize the cultural and individual relativity of morality and many present arguments based on scientific theories about mind, evolution, and society. Scientific, such as theories in evolutionary psychology, cognitive science, and sociology. Legal, our society seems to recognize freedom of conscience, that we should be free to obey our consciences within limits. Considering that we do not have a clear or unified philosophy of conscience, this raises legal, political, and social issues. Popular. Our everyday notions of conscience are philosophically interesting. Consider that conscience is part of us, opposing actions that we ourselves apparently already consider immoral, but are in danger of doing anyway. It seems a little paradoxical. Why do we need a conscience? Evolutionary theory most likely has the answer. Thought about conscience is so diverse and complex that a comprehensive treatment is not possible. This seems another paradox about conscience. We know it most intimately in ourselves. But there is no consensus about where it comes from or how much it should be respected. As far as you see, the English word conscience does not correspond to the Russian word совесть, where совесть is objective and conscience is subjective. What's more, the word совесть also has adjectives, совестчес and совестлess. A совестчес person can be an atheist, while a person who strictly and perfectly follows a religion can be совестлess. A совесtless person is someone who does not listen to, or does not want to listen to the voice of his совесть. But it does not mean that he does not have совесть. Another concept of the Russian culture is nravistness. Nravistness is derived from the Russian word nravится, which means to like. The root of the word is nrav, plus es an adjective ending, and nes a noun ending. Nravistness belongs to the same category as morality and ethics. However, they are different things. Nravistness is a system of inner evaluations. It is good. It is bad. It doesn't matter. It depends on the conditions. Simply speaking, nrav is something that a person accepts, likes, and does not regard as evil, something bad. Let's look into nravistness and morality using the following historical example. Everyone has heard of the great Roman Empire, as well as of the fact that it collapsed. Everybody also knows about grandiose construction of that time, the amphitheater, the Colosseum, that held 50,000 people. Inside the walls of this construction, one could be torn apart by wild animals for the amusement of a civilized audience, or killed during gladiatorial fights. The nravs of those times were that such humiliation of a person in public was not taken by people as evil. What's more, it was one of the ways to amuse oneself. The morality of the time was that the humiliated party was killed. Hardly anybody realizes that since the collapse of the Roman Empire, our nravs have not changed. We still have the same nravs to humiliate others. In the contemporary world, we still have these colosseums, which are football pitches and stadiums for sports competitions, the size of which coincide with the size of the Colosseum of ancient Rome. The same nravs can be traced through other types of sports. For instance, martial arts where, for the amusement of a thoughtless audience, men, as well as women, hit and humiliate each other, with the tacit consent of the crowd, receiving unreasonably high fees without doing anything useful for society. And since the collapse of the Roman Empire, it is only the moral side that has changed. Nowadays, losers are not killed anymore. Conclusion: changing your morality, you do not change your nraviousness. Changing your nraviousness, you also change your morality. In other words, morality is an external behavior. Meanwhile, nraviousness is an inner standard, which can be different from each other. Nravious, nravless. All people are nravious, have nraviousness. However, if a person has not yet decided on his evaluation towards a phenomenon, then in this case, he is nravless, with no evaluations. But nraviousness can be either malnravious, zlanravный, or dobronravious, dobronravный. Looking at the historical example, people remain as malnravious as in the Roman Empire, having morally changed a little. Dobro, it is when the chief motivation comes from your pure heart and selfless wish to give, but not satisfy your ego, not become famous, not make money or any other wishes of this kind. Not to have, but to give. When a person fulfills his dobro, dobres intentions, he does blago, objectively good for people. We looked into the words nraviousness, nravlessness, malnraviousness, and dobronraviousness. Now let's look into some other Russian words consisting of the root prav. If nravs are subjective evaluations in man's psyche, then pravs are objective evaluations of the Creator concerning everything, his objective nraviousness. Based on the root prav, the following words in Russian were formed: pravedny, pravias, and pravedность, praviousness. Pravias is a quality that corresponds to the Creator's nravs, and praviousness is man's nravs that correspond to the Creator's nravs. Moreover, the word praviousness is morphologically similar to another Russian word, справедливость, which is frequently erroneously translated into English as justice or fairness. The word praviousness is translated into two words in Russian, праведность and справедливость. However, we will use only the word praviousness, as the border between these two Russian words is very thin. The Russian words праведность and справедливость go together, they cannot be separate. As for the English words righteousness, justice, and fairness, they contain different images. For instance, righteousness is the quality of being morally right or justifiable. In other words, what is righteous for man is not always nraviously righteous for the Creator. As for the word justice, it often means law abiding within the boundaries of man-made laws that are constantly changing. Meanwhile, the Creator's laws do not change. As for the word fairness, it is often defined as just and reasonable treatment in accordance with accepted rules or principles, treating all people equally and applying reasonable punishments only when rules are broken. As one can see, these words have nothing in common with their Creator's nravs, pravs, and will. There is another word that has the root prav, управление, which basically means governance, ruling. Any action is an act of ruling, governance, which means that every person is a ruler. His particular act of ruling is to have an impact on processes in the surrounding world. For instance, spreading information is an act of ruling. So a ruler is not only a person who holds the position of an official, or someone who pursues internal, external, or global politics. Although the Russian word управление contains the root prav, this does not mean that every act of ruling is pravious. However, the origin of this Russian word gets one thinking. The pravious society is a society in which Dobronravers people unite, the people that do not create conflicts on racial, national, cultural, ideological, religion, status, sex, age, and other grounds. This is not about tolerance, but about philosophical worldview cohesiveness. Truly free people do not aspire to be divided into countries and other particular unifications, but aspire to the global unification. This previous unification of truly free, Dobronravers people in the Russian language has the name of Sobornost. As far as one can see, all the aforementioned concepts of the Russian culture are closely related to God and His design. Does this mean that all carriers of the Russian culture know and consciously follow it? Definitely not. Instead, they prefer to drown their voices of совесть with everyday hustle, a desire to have something, thoughts of not in my backyard, alcohol and other drugs, being completely indifferent and irresponsible towards their country and the world overall. The son of Russian poetry and prophet of the Russian culture, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, profoundly named all these fundamental concepts Russian spirit. This Russian spirit in the heads of its carriers creates a specific cultural contradiction, a certain inner struggle between their voices of совесть and priviousness on one hand, and culture of consumption, harmful individualism, intellectual dependency, criminal negligence, and harmful indifference towards themselves, their families, their country, and humanity on the whole, on the other hand. This mentioned conflict is one of the chief reasons for difficult and tragic Russian history. Another reason arising from the first one is that a vast majority of carriers of the Russian culture refuse to carry out their global mission on the previous enlightenment all over the world. It should be emphasized that carriers of other cultures do not have this contradiction. Does this mean that Russians are better due to their global mission? No, it doesn't. Each civilization has its own global mission. Each civilization has to fulfill its own mission for благо of all humanity, as planet Earth is our common home, and every representative of each civilization is personally responsible for the prosperity and safety of the entire planet. Speaking of the mission of the Russian civilization, one should pay attention to the following. The names of nationalities in the Russian language, except for the nationality Russian, are nouns, but Russian is an adjective. It is well known that in linguistics, adjectives adject to nouns, thus describing their quality characteristics. Therefore, Russian is not a nationality, but is a certain worldview. It is interesting to note that during the time of the USSR, which included many nationalities, peoples, cultures, religions, and races, all citizens of the USSR were named Russians, no matter what nationality, culture, religion, or race they belonged to. Even after the collapse of the USSR, it still remains like this. Words such as a Russian German man, русский немец, a Russian Frenchman, русский француз, a Russian American man, русский американец, and so on, sound harmonic and natural in the Russian language. However, the opposite phrases are not possible. For instance, a German Russian man, немецкий русский, a French Russian man, французский русский, an American Russian man, американский русский, and so on. As a result, a German can be more Russian than an original Russian. There is a good historical example that states Stalin, speaking of himself, said, "I'm Russian of the Georgian nationality." In Russia, representatives of around 160 nationalities and of around 10 religions live peacefully. No single people has ever been annihilated, discriminated against, or oppressed. Peoples that did not have a writing system beforehand received it, as well as a possibility to preserve their cultural identity. Aside from their cultures, all these peoples are carriers of the uniting Russian culture. Accordingly, the global mission of the Russian culture, as one might already have guessed, is to unite the whole world under the aegis of privaciousness and subordinacy. Throughout history, Russia is like a squeeze box that is squeezed in and drawn out. After it was last squeezed in, the collapse of the USSR, it is logically assumed that it should be drawn out.